Disclaimer: I am not a doctor or a psychologist. My ideas about this subject are speculative and not fact. So you've heard of the "I identify as an attack helicopter joke before, I'm sure. Of course you have. But what if I told you it was real? No, I'm not kidding. And this isn't a video where I dunk on Zoomer kids who think they're cats. That might be easy, but that's not what I'm about to do. I think what I have to say might surprise a lot of people. In ancient times, there was otherkin, but we do not speak of them. Instead, let's start with the concept of a xenogender.
The etymology might be kind of obvious. Xeno is the root for alien, and then gender for gender. And as you might be able to tell from the etymology, xenogenders are usually hyperspecific genders that describe someone's gender in a way outside of humanness, because to them, their gender isn't understandable in like human binaries of gender, right? And I think it's rad as hell. Some that you may have heard of or that you may have seen like being made fun of are ones that are connected to nature, like star gender or cloud gender.
Beetleic, an aesthetic gender relating to beetles. It is used to describe a gender experience as being small, subtle, but with vibrancy. It can also be used by people who are kin with bugs and insects or feel like their gender is like a beetle. Dear glory.
And then another umbrella of genders, which is within the like xenogender umbrella, is neurogenders, which are connected to neurodiversity. But that doesn't mean they're invalid, and that doesn't mean that we shouldn't respect them.
This phenomenon has been closely linked to and may have its origins in autism and neurodivergence.
Autism gender. I cannot make that up. Autism gender.
But backing up a little, recently I saw a comment on one of Riley Grace Rochong's videos making some kind of joke, I guess. Riley was critiquing one of Ben Shapiro's videos where he was discussing trans issues with an audience member who mentioned, and someone mentioned something about identifying as a cat. And so it spawned this comment. Rando says, "I am Jesus from the Bible." Me: "No, you're not." Riley: "You're denying that person their humanity." Brought to you by your local university. Oh, that's hilarious. Good one, shitlord. But in all seriousness, they know not what they do. As we shall see, this really is Pandora's box. It's easy to say, obviously someone who identifies as Jesus is just crazy, and telling them that they are invalid has nothing to do with the validity of being transgender. Well, it's complicated. Really complicated. Dissociative identity disorder enters stage left. So we have to factor in the experiences of those with DID, formerly known as multiple personality disorder. In case you haven't been paying attention, the DID community has exploded just in the past few years. They refer to themselves as systems made up of different alters, or personalities.
This alter is a real person, just like any of your other alters, or like any person without DID who isn't an alter. All of us are deserving of love and patience and acceptance.
Fictives and factives are among the type of alters people with DID experience. A fictive is an alter that is based on a fictional character. A factive is an alter based on a real person, historical or contemporary. And you guessed it, there are some people who have Jesus as a factive alter in their system, though the question is really if they are a fictive or a factive. That's a whole nother debate though. There are also instances of alters being animals or objects. But what is going on here? You have people identifying with fictional or non-human things as a gender, and you have people identifying with fictional or non-human things literally as an alternate person in their body. I'll repeat, I'm not a doctor or a psychologist or scientist, but I do have some ideas about what might be happening based on some aspects of my own personal experience. You might be wondering, what use is there to what you have to say? You don't experience these things. Well, that's not exactly true. When I first heard about people unironically identifying as lapis lazuli from Steven Universe, I thought it was absurd and I made fun of them to my friend. Then one day, this past year, one night, I actually experienced a fictive personality come forward for myself. Now, I don't have DID. I have schizoaffective disorder, which in my case is schizophrenia light. I do have a history of thinking I was certain historical figures during periods of psychosis. However, this recent incident was different from those times. It wasn't psychosis. I didn't really dissociate totally either. I was listening to an old Japanese drama CD from a game I used to like. When I heard the character in question speaking, something clicked in my head. I never liked this character especially, but I felt, somehow deep down, that this was me. I tried explaining what was happening in other ways. Maybe this character just reflected my mood at the time. No, that wasn't it. Maybe I was relating to this character a lot. Nah, that wasn't it either. I truly felt like a personality that had been suppressed in me for a long time finally had a solid identity. They had somehow always been there, and in this moment, I had completely embodied them. Everything seemed to make sense, and I felt a great deal of relief at this realization. The level of identification that I felt was almost spiritual. So that made me a believer. And yes, this character is an anime cat boy. All this to say, I'm not just speculating about what's going on with other people. This is also a personal speculation of what might be going on with myself. So, what is going on? In the first YouTube video I ever made, currently unlisted but link in the description, I posed the idea that gender exists as something like a major archetype, in the Jungian sense. I know, I'm about to sound a little woo-woo Jordan Peterson, but bear with me and consider the lobster gender, when your gender expression is existing in a natural hierarchy. Okay, I made that up, haha, very funny, but consider rather subconscious archetypes. Basically, anything that exists that has a repeating story in relation to human evolution throughout millions of years became an archetype in our psychology, in our psyche. This includes all sorts of things, types of people, like the trickster or witch, or animals, monsters, angels, aliens, a mixture of those things, you name it. Although Jung theorized that the psyche was made up of all the archetypes, he believed the personality was dominated by a particular one. So what if this archetype was a feline? I don't know if attack helicopters have been around long enough to embed themselves in the subconscious, but hey, who knows? So anyway, gender, man and woman, feminine and masculine, would be one of the broadest and most powerful archetypes. And although I believe each individual has both within them, nature somehow made it so that most people identify with one or the other. Personally, I think that although gender and sex aren't the same thing, they are related to each other in such a way that gender ultimately derives itself from the reality of bimodal sex. In this sense, I don't think it's accurate to name genders after animals, objects, supernatural creatures, or other archetypes that don't relate to sex. I don't think gender is the proper categorization. Those identities are something else that we don't have a word for yet. I mean, there is otherkin, but we do not speak of them. But for someone who identifies as, say, a cat, obviously they don't literally share the same physiology or psychology of an actual cat. Rather, they identify as what a cat represents on an archetypal level. But the point is that the deeper psychological realm is finally breaking out into our cold and structured scientific existence in ways no one could have predicted. Or perhaps they did. Magician and epic troll Aleister Crowley claimed that this coming age is the Ion of Horus, or the age of the child. He was kinda banana balls, but I really think he was onto something with this. Quote, "The modern Ion of Horus is portrayed as a time of self-realization as well as a growing interest in all things spiritual, and is considered to be dominated by the principle of the child." I'm going to be expanding on his ideas a bit, but children experience an inner world that is less constrained by external realities and is more magical and free. I think this release and resurgence of the imaginary, of characters and symbols of the unconscious, something currently associated with childhood, could be the future reality of humanity even until adulthood. This may be a natural extension of neoteny. Neoteny in humans is the retention of juvenile features well into adulthood. There is a vast literature on this phenomenon which I can't cover here, but basically, the retention of childhood traits later into adulthood gave us an evolutionary advantage, particularly when it comes to learning. That process is probably still occurring, but in some way that I am not smart enough to pinpoint. In summary, are xenogenders and fictives valid? I wouldn't call them genders, but yes, I do believe that there is yet another unexplored psychological reality to humans that has arisen from the depths like the terrible dragon of chaos lurking beneath our orderly world. This may be another step in the journey of humanity toward full self-actualization. The reality of the inner world, of the feminine and masculine, of suppressed personalities created through trauma, and the subconscious archetypes that haunt our imagination, I believe there is much more to discover about the human condition. What was once strictly delegated to the internal, to the childish, may make its way into the external and become part of our daily lives. Maybe in the future, humanity will exist more in that realm of childhood in terms of creativity and openness. Perhaps technology will solve the problems of survival and blur the line between dreams and reality, and our consciousness will reflect that multiplicity of the self. I don't know, though, but a girl can speculate, can't she? Perhaps you think I'm crazy, perhaps not, but I thank you for making it to the end of this. Hopefully, I have provided you something to consider, even if you are unconvinced. But that's all, folks. Bye.
Then there's the chaos that's so overwhelming that it just demolishes everything.